Alright class, we're going to go over some utmost basics about MEL scripting right now. Now, whether you've had some experience programming before or you have absolutely none, I'm going to try and keep this as basic as possible. If you have had an experience in programming before, it'll help a lot, regardless of whatever language you've used. The logic is always exactly the same. They always have variables and loops and things like that. Now, we're going to be going over things like where to script at in Maya. We're going to go over basic syntax, variables, loops, and just basic command syntax on just using anything from whether it's group to polysphere, anything like that. So we'll keep it basic. Now I'm just kind of winging it here, so some of these things might not go as perfectly as possible, but if I find any big errors, I'll just stop tape, continue once I fixed it, in case I misspell something or forget a semicolon or something like that. So here we are in Maya. The place that you find your script editor at is right down here in the bottom right hand corner. You can also find it through menus, but this is just the easiest way in my opinion. In the script editor you have a couple of options up here. We have some erasers which actually help out quite a bit. Let's say up here it's just really full of a bunch of crap, bunch of garbage. Then what you can do is just erase that stuff. Now over here we also have just not really sure what to call these, but it's kind of like show top, show bottom, show both. We have this top section up here and the bottom section, so you can either say, oh, only show me the top, only show me the bottom, or show me both. And I prefer just to keep up both most of the time anyway, but just those are just some useful buttons. Now also, two things that I really like to use a lot are these two right here, echo all commands and line number and error. Line number and error is probably one of the most important things you could use, because if there is an error, it's going to tell you where it's at. So I always have that on. Echo all commands, it's not always on because it kind of tends to fill up the top part with a lot of useless garbage. But if I need it, then I can turn it on. It basically traces everything. Like even if I just open up a menu, I'll turn that on, and then as I scroll through them, it's going to tell you a whole bunch of stuff. Now, if I turn that off, now when I go through, nothing's showing up in there. So I don't really need that for now. Basically, that's your basic introduction to the script editor itself. Now, down here, you'll notice we have two tabs, MEL and Python. We're going to be using MEL for this class, so just make sure you're on the MEL tab. If you ever get an error after you run it, and it just says something about Python in there, then you'll know you're in the wrong tab. Other things you can do, if we right-click in here, you can create new tabs, like if you want to have multiple scripts open at a time, you can do that. You can run it from down here by going to execute. A lot of different things, but I'll tell you some different ways as I wing my way through this. So let's talk about basic syntax in MEL scripting. And by the way, MEL stands for Maya Embedded Language, in case you wanted to know. It's very close to C++, or most C languages actually, in its syntax. Let's just use a very basic command here. I'm going to use the polysphere command. Now, we'll actually get into the flags here too, since I'm already at it, but polysphere. That is the basic command right there to create a sphere in Maya, a polygon sphere to be specific. So if I run this, there it is. There's our polysphere in all of its sphere-y goodness. Okay? Now, if I wanted to do more to that, I can through the use of flags. But what I really want you to notice right now is just what I have on this line. I have command and a semicolon. A semicolon is a terminator for a line. Basically says this is the end of my line. In other programming languages, they use things like carriage return, which is just an enter, or other types of things I've seen in the past. But MEL requires that you put a semicolon at the end of most lines. There are certain types of lines that don't require that, and we'll see that later when we get into loops. But for now, just any command in itself, polysphere, group, move, things like that, will all require that you have a semicolon at the end of that line. Now, let's take a look at what I meant by flags. All right, first things first, the most important thing that you can use in Maya when you're scripting is the MEL command reference. This has helped me out thousands and thousands of times. When it comes up, if this happens, just tell it to allow block content, hit yes, and now you can use the search. So let's look up polysphere. As I type it in, it'll find it for me. And here's all the information. So, if you notice, we have some lots of stuff in here that you may not know what it is. Right here is the basic format of the command itself. We have the command, polysphere. After that, anything with a little hyphen before it is what's known as a flag, where we can do specific um, attributes. We can change them when we create it. That way it's not just the default stuff. You know, when I create a polysphere, it's called psphere1, psphere2. Well, here's name. I can tell it what to call it. Things like that, okay? So we'll check out how to write that. But this right here is actually the basic format of how you would write it. Okay, so you'd have command, flag, and at the end you would have a semicolon. And if you ever wanted to know more about what these flags do, or something that's similar to it, like obviously we have the other poly primitives in there, you can just look at it right down here. Now, what we have in the MEL command reference here is the long name, which it says up here, dash axis, and the short name. So either one of these will work for the same exact flag. So if I wanted to set the radius of the sphere when I create it, well, I could do it like this or like this. Pretty simplistic, but and then it tells you what type of argument and linear, and you'll get used to it after some time. Even when I first looked at this stuff, it was like reading another language to me. Now these properties down here means that these can be used in creation, they can be queried, or they can be edited. Okay, that's what those three mean. You'll find those useful later on when we start using UI elements, which you can find under here, by the way. Alright, so let's get back to the sphere. Let's see, what are we going to use? Let's say I change the name, and I'll change the radius. Okay, so the name of the object, dash name, the radius, dash radius. Obviously, there are shorter versions of that, dash n and dash r. So I'll go ahead and show you the format using this. Bring this back over here. Alright, so poly sphere. Now that's the beginning of our line. That's the command we're using. But what flags? Let's do dash name. I'll do long names for now so you know what I'm doing. Alright, in there, I'll give it a name. What do I want to call this? Ball. Something like that. Now, generally speaking, when you use something that's going to have a string for a name, a string being any kind of word, you're going to want to put it in quotes most likely. If it gives you an error, take off the quotes. Simple as that. I don't know all of them by heart, but you know, it's pretty simple fixes like that. All right, and then dash radius. So how big do we want our radius? Radius is going to be something like a decimal value. So I can put whatever I want, 15.26252. There you go. And then at the very end of the line, I give it a semicolon. Now, to run this, there's a couple ways I could do it. We have some execute buttons up here. What I prefer to do is to just select all. You can hit Control A, you can highlight it however you want, and just hit the Enter key on your number pad. Now, if you're on a laptop, you may not have a number key, but you can always just highlight it and hit Execute. And what that does is executes what you have selected, and it doesn't remove it from this bottom part of your script editor. I like to keep it up there in case I want to go back. It just makes it quicker. So if I minimize that, there's my ball. I will get channel box up. There it's called ball, and the radius is 15.252. So that's it. That's the basic structure of a line. Now, obviously, there are a lot more things we could do with that. And while we may not be creating something as simple as a polysphere, we'll be doing more elaborate things like creating windows and buttons and layouts and other stuff. For now, that'll do. Okay, so let's move on from that. Let's go on to variables now that we have the basic syntax done. All right, so the different types of variables that exist in Maya are basically the same type of variables that you find in a lot of other programming languages. We have, we'll go over 4 of them really quickly. The first one that we'll go over is the string. Okay, when you're declaring a variable, there are 2 ways to do it. Let me go back one step. All right, when you're declaring a variable, proper naming consists of this: the dollar symbol and the name of the variable. Now, variable is just a placeholder. If you guys remember algebra from back in middle school, high school, you remember using x and y and a and b. That's a variable. It can be anything. Now, in this case, we have specific types of variables, and we'll get to that in a minute, but proper syntax for naming variables consists of starting it with a dollar and then giving it a name. So, if I could spell, dollar variable. That would be a very easy variable name. Now, even easier than that would be like $x. That could be a lot of things. Now, I'll use $x a lot when I use loops and stuff like that, but you want to be very specific when you name these things because otherwise, you may not know what it is later. If you call it, I don't know, dollar that, you first off, you probably won't be able to remember that by heart, and you might not know what it is. So let's say It's something like, I don't know, it's a variable that's going to be related to my left FKIK control, something like that. So dollar left underscore FKIK control, I don't know, value. I don't know. I'm just winging it here. So, something like that. So you at least know what it refers to. Now, in this case, I'm just going to tell you about implicit versus explicit variable declaration. Um, what this means is implicit declaration means you're specifically saying what type of variable it is, whether it's a string or an int or a float or a vector, and we'll get to all those in just a minute. But the explicit, well, no, implicit. Actually, I said that wrong. Implicit would be when it is implied by the value you give it. Explicit is where you specifically give it a type like string or int or something like that. So explicitly declaring your variables is where you say it's this type. Implicitly is where Maya has to assume that's what you mean. So let's say I just say $x, okay? Right now I'm not giving it a type. I didn't say it's a string or an int or a float. I'm just saying $x. Now if I say equals 3, Maya is going to assume this is a certain type of variable. Now, we'll go over those in a minute still. But if I go 3.0, that's a different type of variable. Or I could say equals doggy, something like that. That's another type of variable. I am implying that this $x is a specific type of variable based on what I'm setting it equal to when I declare it. Okay? So, explicit. Now here's where we get into the types. We have 4 basic types. String, int, float, and vector. Now, a string, in its simplicities, is this. Let's say string $x equals doggy. A string, in essence, is a word or a collection of words. It can be a whole sentence. It can be a paragraph. It takes all characters in it as long as you just do this. Leave it in quotes. It will know what you're talking about. And, of course, end it with a semicolon. Now, an integer variable is a numerical variable that is a whole number. There's no decimal point in an integer value. 54 or 16 or 987654321. That is a whole number. There is no decimal point behind it, therefore it is an integer. And again, semicolon. Float is the opposite of an integer. It is a number with a decimal point, often called a floating point number, hence float. So $x equals, I don't know, 13.4587, whatever, 8675309, whatever you want it to be. As long as it's got a decimal in it, that's a float variable. And last but not least, a vector would be a collection of, it's a triplet, something like RGB or XYZ. It's going to have 3 values to it. So it could be 1.3, comma, 4.5, comma, 26.9. I'm not sure. It can be a lot of things. So as long as it's within these little alligator mouths, or greater than, less than symbols, whatever you want to call, that is a vector variable. But those are the 4 basic types, and we'll probably end up using every single one of those in the process of creating a character UI. Okay, so that's your basic variables that I wanted to go over, and yes, we will be using tons of them. The next topic I'd really like to go over is a very important one. It's called a loop. A loop is something that just does an action and repeats it based on a certain range that the scripter sets. There are a couple different types of loops, but I'm going to go over one for now. We'll do some more later on. I'm going to go over what's known as the for loop. So, a for loop, this is the syntax here. Start with the word for. Big surprise there, right? Open parentheses. And what you want to do is you need to use a variable in here to set your range. What it does is you're going to end up doing a start value and go until value, if you want to call it that, and a step value. Okay, and then what you want to do is use these curly brackets, an open one and a closed one, and in between there, anything that goes on in here will repeat based off of your range. Okay, so I'll replace these so you can see what I'm talking about. So we want a start value, a go until value, and then a step value. So I'll start with x equals 0. Okay, notice how I'm using $x. It's just something that I've done for many years, and I'm so used to it by now that I rarely ever use any other variable other than x. Again, it is nowhere declared in this statement what x is. I didn't go to the beginning of my program and say, int $x. I don't have to, because within this loop, I am explicitly declaring it as 0. Okay. Now it really doesn't matter in this case because it's not your standard type of variable where it's being used as a placeholder. It's used being within the scope of this loop. Okay. So our start value, our loop is going to start using the number 0. Okay, and that's very common. There's many reasons why, and we'll get into that in class, why you start with 0 a lot of the time. Okay, now the go until value, this is what the loop will go up to in its number sequence until it stops. I will use $x is less than or equal to, let's say 25. All right. Now, basically what this means is it's going to start at 0. Actually, let me lower this to 5. That'll make this easier on me, my typing. So it's going to say, okay, loop. It's going to say start the loop on step 1. X is 0. Do whatever actions. Step 2. Loop is now at 1. Do all the actions. 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, how many numbers do we have here? Oh, I accidentally hit enter. I'm sorry. We have 6 numbers. So realize that when you use less than or equal to, it's actually going to go up to 5. This is actually a very important concept when using loops because you really need to think about what number you're going to put in here. So if I only wanted it to do a total of 5 in total, I would do from 0 to 4 because it's going to do 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That is 5 numbers in total. It all depends on a couple of things, whether you need to use this number x within the loop, or it gets a little more complicated. I'm not going to get into it right now, but you can put x is less than 5, and again, as long as it's less than 5, the loop keeps going. If it's equal 5, it stops. Okay, it's a fairly basic concept, but it takes a little bit of logic to understand what's going on there. Okay. Last but not least, we just need to tell it what number to go by as a step size. So if it's at 0, what's the next number it's going to do? Well, we want it to add up by 1 each time, so it'll go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could do decimal numbers. You could do every 2, whatever you want. But I stick to the obvious, to 1. Now, basically what we're going to do is $x equals $x plus 1. So at the end of the loop, it's going to say whatever x is now, it's going to be itself plus 1. So if it was 0, it's going to be 0, or $x equals 0 plus 1. Boom, x is now 1. Next round of the loop. Now, this $x equals $x plus 1, there's actually a shorthand way of putting this. Choose $x, lowercase x, plus. That is the same exact thing as $x equals x plus 1. Okay? Now, the opposite of this, minus minus. Instead of plus 1, it's minus 1. But I'm going to use x plus plus, okay? This is the basic syntax of your loop, okay? So I could do something like make it print, for instance. Print, hello. Now if I run this, boom, hello, 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 hello. Okay? Notice how, again, it's only going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So if I say x is less than or equal to 500, we're going to get a lot of hellos. Let me erase the top part here. Oh, I erased everything. Well, that's what I get for not paying attention, huh? There we go. So I'll run it again, and we get an awful lot of hellos. I'm not going to count them because I'm pretty sure you can assume there are 500 of them, okay? So that is a loop. There's a couple other types. We'll go over those in class. There are do-whiles and if this, then this, and there's a couple other types of things, much like a loop, where we'll have to use very similar tactics, where you'll have conditional statements, where if this is true, then do this. It's kind of similar in the sense that it's all within its own scope, much like this is all within the loop. So we'll go over that in class, though. But for now, that is your introduction to MEL. What I highly recommend you do, though, just go to the MEL command reference. Start looking up some stuff. You'd be surprised how many of these commands that you've used before have more abilities to them than you're used to, because you just see the options that are in Maya. There's other stuff that maybe you just haven't realized that you can do with them. But until next time, good luck, guys.